action. I can't get no call to action, but I try, and I try, and I try.
Hello and welcome to Call to Action, the go-to podcast for anyone trying to make sense of the world of marketing, business and beyond. In an industry that is a minefield of utter bollocks, we aim to capture our heroes and allies from the front line to have a chinwag with. It's like Pokemon Go, with the single but vital exception that it's not a short-term bandwagon of shite. It's brought to you by Gasp, and I'm Giles Edwards. Today I've caught Mr Gammon. Costume designer, fashion stylist and distinctive English gent, Mr Gammon is the go-to guy for creatively styled costume. No cast too vast, nor celebrity too big. He cut his teeth dressing late 90s music stars including the Rolling Stones, Adam Ant, the Spice Girls to name a few. Since then, his intricate, outlandish and jaw-dropping costume work has lit up a stellar CV of movies, TV shows, ads and music videos. Whether it's dressing a cast of kids for Sainsbury's The Big Night, yes, he created Plug Boy, or fitting out stylish gents for Guinness Sapeurs, his keen observational eye, imagination and commitment to courtesy have made him a firm favourite in Adland. Mr Gammon says whether you are styling a reluctant pop star or making a naturalistic filmic piece of work with a cast of thousands, the beauty of a great costume designer is to look like you were not there at all. Welcome to the show, Mr Gammon.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. It's great to talk at last.
No, thank you.
Right, let's start with 7 quick-fire questions. Number 1, hats or cats?
Hats or cats? You mean like meowing cats, not dogging cats? Oh, come on. Oh, my words. Well, for me going out, it's got to be a hat.
Number 2, Doctor Who or Sherlock Holmes?
Doctor Who. Doctor Who in one way. Now, remember, this isn't like modern Doctor Who. I'm talking about the old clunky stuff that was around when I was a kid. It was the idea that first sowed a seed, as well as kind of pop music, about how can you look different from other people. So the idea of an Edwardian dressed gentleman, but was in a kind of spaceship, his time machine that was kind of white and glistening, and the juxtaposition between different things kind of bolted on together is why I would choose Doctor Who over Holmes, even though I do like Jeremy Brett's kind of paranoid coke fiending detective.
Nice. The Rolling Stones or the Spice Girls?
Rolling Stones. I think what was amazing about that opportunity is that I was such a greenback. I was so green at the beginning of my career that the idea of meeting someone that even my grandparents had heard of was such a big kind of coup. And the biggest thing that you then realize is the reality check of knowing that you're not their equal. You're not as important as them. And as a kind of naive young graduate from the Royal College of Art, I really thought that there'd be hey, it's great to meet you. I love your jackets. And I love it. No, they couldn't be interested. They couldn't be less interested. They're more than happy to be cool wearing my stuff. But that reality check was just so important.
Yeah, no doubt. This is one of my favourite ads. Guinness Sapeurs or Sainsbury's The Big Night?
The Sapeurs.
Yeah.
It was so remarkable to be. I felt like I was an ambassador on that job for Guinness. I was an ambassador for Guinness. I was an ambassador for the production, and it was just this idea where you're working with a selection of different types of individuals. Not all of them were Sapeurs. Some of them were cast. None of them brought stuff. So we brought, I'd say 25 suitcases at 25 kilos each, and they did fittings, and I treated them like they were rock stars. So it's like, I'm styling you based on the kind of look that you already have. They called me Prince Charles. And so it was just so remarkable. And we'd meow at each other. So we had this international mewing. So if there was a breakdown of communication, because they would speak French and I can speak French, or they spoke Congolese, or kind of like a version of Zulu, and I could only speak English, we'd occasionally go, and we knew that we were on the same page. So
I'm going to ask you more about this.
Yes, of course.
Later. The patience of a saint or the tact of a diplomat? You've been described as having both.
Diplomat. You've got to be a diplomat. I do have the patience of a saint, but sometimes the diplomacy, one needs to speak up and one needs to tell people, hands up who wrote this shit and hands up who's fucking paying for it. The rest of you, even though that doesn't sound very diplomatic.
No.
That's a 50-50. Let's even scrap that. Let's just say it's a 50-50.
Right, there's a couple of daft ones to end with. So George V or Edward VII? Which are you more like?
So what was it, George V?
Or Edward VII?
Edward VII is Mrs. Simpson, right?
Well, and I've had, this is, you've been described as looking like both of them, and I've had your photo up against both of theirs.
Oh,
and there's
what?
a time where they both merge into, I'm convinced, the same person.
That is hilarious. Well, it's weird to think how... Yes, well, let's say Edward VII is Mrs. Simpson. I'm sure it is. And there was a time, because I'm for your listeners, I'm a bearded, mustachioed individual. And there are times, but I'm bald. But there are times if I'm on a job, if there's a wig there, we put the wig on and then we play roadie or king. Is he a roadie or is he a king? Does he look like the head of a monarchy, or does he look like he'd be working for Black Sabbath?
Oh, amazing. There's a fine line.
Oh, yes.
And lastly, you might be able to guess who gave me the inspiration for this one. 3 a.m. in Newport Pagnell services with some vintage sci-fi rebels, or 3 a.m. on the mean streets of Croydon with some old school wrestlers.
Oh, it's got to be Newport Pagnell service station. That was just a gift. Johnny Vegas, Mark Heap, recreating 80s space opera, Blake Seven. Just a remarkable Mackenzie Crook, Martin Freeman. I mean, it was just like the gold. It was just a moment where all of those people were put together at one stage of their careers, and some of them have gone on to amazing stratospheric kind of stuff, and doing stuff that looked like the original TV show, which was this kind of slightly clunky 80s kind of thing, but our friend Tim Plester wrote this amazing kind of script that had this kind of wonderful, it was almost like a family drama, a kitchen sink drama. It wasn't about fighting warlords and stuff. It's almost like, where did you put the keys when we parked the car? Or how much food are we going to give the kids before? They're never going to sleep if you give them hot chocolate. It's this kind of pedestrian kitchen sink drama set in the world of 80s menagerie. That's a long answer for you, Giles.
It was an answer, though. It was good. You didn't dodge any. Well, one of them, I suppose, you sidestepped slightly, but no, Well played. Listen, thank you so much for joining us. We always start the show by asking guests to describe the path to where they are now, because it's so rarely a linear one. So could you start by telling our audience what was your first ever job, and then what was your first proper job?
My first job was, now you could say paperboy, but this is the irritating mass papers that would be printed locally. So not a free newspaper. And I remember when I would have been about 12, 13, maybe a bit younger. And I'd be in the back of a van with a bloke called Malcolm, who was like a alcoholic we would have a van filled with like thousands of these free newspapers. And we knew of other teams of delivery people who would then go and set up a bonfire and burn the lot. But we would traipse around Hillingdon and Harrow, kind of posting all of these free newspapers. And the sad thing about Malcolm, because I remember Malcolm, he was the kind of person that would have been a rockabilly in the 50s, or maybe a bit later. He was a rockabilly, but his hair's receded, but he still managed to comb his hair into that duck ass kind of style at the back, but he was completely bald on top. And it always fascinated me. And he would be the kind of person, he was a tragic character, but he was the kind of person that once we'd received our money in cash from delivering these free newspapers over the summer, he would then drink the money he earned. So by Monday, he was skint again. And that he lived in this cyclical kind of life. So special brewed cans for lunch. It was that kind of thing. It was an eye-opener. But so that was that job. But the other jobs I had at the time was customizing and making summer shorts, Bermuda shorts for friends at school. So I kind of liked this idea of I didn't know about design as such, but the idea of making and customizing and doing that kind of stuff. And then my actual proper first job that kind of took me on this trajectory would be after graduating from the Royal College of Art. When you graduate, I did a menswear collection, this kind of huge, vast collection that was actually inspired by things like Jason King, kind of cult TV shows, dandyism, and all this kind of flora of kind of beautiful brocade fabrics and stuff. And all my classmates were like, "You camp bastard." Like everything was this kind of world of, "Oh, sequins, you make jeans in that." And, it was a funny old time. But my first proper job was designing clothes for Adamant. It was having a comeback in the 90s. And I would have been about 22, 23. I faxed. This is how old this is, listener. We faxed examples of my collection. So you can imagine at the receiving end how badly it came out. It would be faxed to different record companies, and there was a video commissioner. I only had one response, and that was from Trudy Bellinger, who was a video commissioner at EMI. And she said, "Oh, there's a stylist looking for like young designers to dress a pop star who's making a bit of a comeback." And that was Adam. I ended up designing stuff for his tour. He kind of took me to the Groucho Club. I met loads of old punks, and it was just a real eye-opener. And he was just really sweet and kind of wonderful and encouraging and just remarkable. And he then recommended me to someone he knew in management for the Rolling Stones, which then led me to making stuff for the Stones. I was only like 24 when I first designed stuff for the Stones.
So did you know then when you were making these Bermuda shorts, was that because I think you said you were about, did you say you were 14?
Yeah, about 14.
Was that at all related to the idea of costume and giving people the appropriate kind of tailored shorts, or was that more literally just a money-making scheme as a young teenager?
No, I think back then I liked the idea of not looking like other people. And I think this kind of hotbed of 80s inspiration would have been if you think, Giles, back then I'd be hanging out with a bunch of gothic punks and we'd all sit and drink kind of cider in the graveyard in suburban London. And I liked the Specials and Madness and all these ska bands and two-tone music. And I would turn up dressed like a punk, but in colour. So all of my friends who are kind of just wearing black and, they just had this very austere kind of look. And I would turn up with a polka dot handkerchief and my cliffed up hair and, kind of Victoriana shirts and kind of, I'd try and make things work. So I was always kind of customizing and doing that kind of stuff. And I think the idea of trying to do something different, how can I get into the nuances of design and how, so let's start off by customizing. Now let's start making trousers and all that kind of stuff. And, but, the beginning of it happened because I made a joke at school that made everyone laugh, which was, you're choosing your GCSEs. What subjects are you going to choose? And I said needlework, and everyone thought that was hilarious. And I then got sent to the headmaster, and it wasn't like, I went to just a regular state school, but the headmaster said, "Are you being really serious about this?" And obviously, Giles, I was then going, yeah, well, if girls can do metal work, it's almost like I had to live the lie. I had to justify what I was saying. Yeah, of course I want to, yeah. And of course I got bullied, and it was on a bit kind of, nasty, and, when you're a kid, you kind of brush it off. And I'm still doing it, if you know what I mean. I'm still kind of making clothes and kind of working in that. So that catalyst from making a joke at school is what then led to me making Bermuda shorts, that then led to me years later making clothes for the Rolling Stones. Mic drop.
So at the RCA, was it a degree in fashion, or was it more than that?
Yeah, so I did a degree. So I had quite a long art education. So I did a art foundation course after A-levels. That was for a year. Then I did a degree in Middlesex in North London for 3 years. And then after I finished at Middlesex, I then did a 2-year Masters of Arts. So there was only like 8 places in the country. And so I was very fortunate to get into there. And I then was there for 2 years. It was just remarkable. When you suddenly are at a art establishment and you feel like you're an ambassador of the place that you're in, people would beg security guards to keep the building open so that you could continue working. It was the first time when I saw fastidious people really wanting to be somewhere as far as related to my education. Whereas in the past, it would be, what's the minimum we can get away with? What's the maximum amount of partying that we can do? And what's the minimum amount of work so we can pass this course? And as soon as you then did an MA, you're meeting vehicle design students. You're meeting people who are doing fine art, sculpture. And there's this kind of hotbed of different contemporaries who just want to be there doing their thing. It was quite an eye-opener.
Yeah, no, that's lovely. I mean, to be honest, it reminds me one of the happiest years of my life was actually my art foundation at Kingston at the Knights Park campus, and it was exactly that. And I wonder if it was a similar path, albeit I don't want to force any parallels, but to you, in as much as you loved it so much that you weren't necessarily forward thinking about what your job / career, whatever word we want to use, might be thereafter.
Yeah, I mean, that is my criticism about colleges, especially back then. I'm quite critical of colleges now because I think they're more enterprise money-making machines where the students are clients, they're customers, but students don't realize they are. So they're kind of abused. They're not really given the opportunities, the education that they probably were when I was there. And I think that's a real kind of shame. I don't know if that's necessarily because, or it's not necessarily because of how the Royal College of Art is run, but certainly other art educational establishments, they know that you could have a course where you could do a modular in Blade Runner, followed by 1940s crochet, and that would be a degree. But that's not necessarily going to get you a vocation, but your family will be happy that you got a degree in something. So I think there's a level of commercialism that has led to this kind of homogenized version of education, which I think is to the detriment of art school. But I think when I was at college, there was this whole thing of you'd almost rate people as you're going to be the new John Galliano, you're going to be the Jean-Paul Gaultier, you're going to be the Balenciaga. There really was this idea that the way that we were taught under the stewardship of John Miles, who ran the college at the time, is that they were creating stars. I mean, Christopher Bailey was at my year. He went on to run Burberry. Just remarkable individuals. But there very much was this, I'd even say when I left college, that even though I went on and made stuff for the Rolling Stones, I then made another collection, which was kind of a waste of time and a waste of money. But you then had it in your mindset that you were Jean-Paul Gaultier and that you were going to do a 32-piece collection. But for who? What was the point? And I think that's where college didn't teach you about the practicalities of money, marketing yourself, how you could run your own business. And I think the people who did well at college were the people who then went to work for Louis Vuitton or Balenciaga or Max Mara, who would then actually be headhunted to go work in those fashion houses. Yeah. And I think back then, I wanted to be a designer, so I thought I'd have my own label. So not such a great way of starting, but, from that, it then spiraled into music and doing what I do now.
Did you ever try to kind of walk that path which would have led you in that other direction? That more, I suppose.
I think I did as so far as getting in contact with stylists who would borrow my collection that would then get tear sheets in things like The Face and Dazed and Confused and different kind of fashion magazines. And it was realizing that wasn't the way to monetize what you were doing. When I started making money would be when people would say, can we borrow your collection and we'll rent it from you because we're going to dress a new boy band or a new pop group. And that was the way that stuff would happen. And in those early days, I'd have stylists get in contact with me saying, could you make something for David Bowie's tour? Or could you come up with an idea for the Spice Girls? And so those stylists would have a whole range of different designers making stuff for them. And I think in those early days, that was when I started making kind of good money from doing stuff. I mean, when I did this Rolling Stones stuff, I cleared my student debts within 6-7 months because I did 2 tours. But I didn't design the whole tour. I designed like a handful of jackets and coats that 2 or 3 members of the band wore. Whereas, because you had a stylist who'd call in and buy stuff, and as I said, he'd had this kind of huge collection of stuff that they'd have on tours, and so that's how my thing worked. But it was amazing when there was a press conference for the Voodoo Lounge tour, and Mick Jagger is wearing my jacket for the press conference, and I remember trying to get copies of Dutch newspapers where he's on the cover, so I could have my early tear sheets, because back then it was all about having tear sheets and stuff in your portfolio that you could then send out to other record labels and stuff. But,
Yeah.
oh my God, it sounds like I'm talking about such a long time ago. Oh my God. Anyway, carry on, Giles. What's next?
There's a lovely line from you, which is, when I first started, I wanted to be a fashion designer who made clothes for famous people. But as soon as I went on set for the first time, I just loved the family unit of creatives, crew, cinematographers and directors all coming together. And from there, it spurred me on. So was that first time on set, was that quite, I don't know, was it quite intoxicating? Was it just a collaboration?
Yeah, it was amazing. I mean, I was lucky that I came from an arty background. So my father is a musician, he's a pianist. And so I'd seen rehearsals with dancers and being backstage and had a taste of that kind of world. But I remember going on, I think it was either, there was little bits and pieces that I'd seen, but not greatly. But I remember it was when Adamant's stylist, Andy Blake, invited me to a shoot to see my stuff on Adam for the first time. And that was amazing. When you realise it's not 10 people on a shoot. It's like 40 people on a shoot, especially a lot of the big commercials that I do today, like that Sainsbury's Christmas job that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, the big night.
That's a huge cast, so let alone agency and client and all of those people. And there is gaffers and riggers, and there's just so much that's part of that family. And then what's addictive is there's one side of it, which is the common good of the shoot. How can we, as the costume designer, make this better? How can that look stylish? How can we make the artist happy? How can the director be made happier because of what your contribution is? It's like you're part of that team. And I think the idea of that it just felt like a natural kind of home. I'm very lucky to work in that kind of environment and to kind of come across, even when you bump into crew that you've worked with in the past or extras that you've worked with on something, and people go, "All right, Mr Gammon." It's just lovely to have that, to have that reciprocated, to have that thing. And even times, even before a shoot, where you're talking to a production designer and you're talking about color palettes and you're talking about the practicalities of stuff. When we did the Sainsbury's job, is that a prop or is that a costume? And I would generally say, if it's being worn, then it should be a costume. But then that works to my convenience. If somebody says, we want him to, I can't give an example, we want him to hold an umbrella, I'll go, no, that's a prop. I'm not doing props. So it's almost like, if it works within what I think is best for my contribution, then that's what I'll do.
But I like that. Can I just pick up on that point there, though? That when is it a costume and when is it a prop? Because it was that very ad. I think it was an interview you gave with, I think it was Campaign, where you talked about the Queen. And they needed a costume for the Queen. And your idea was, well, it's Christmas, so the Queen belongs in the telly. Which is just stupid.
No, totally. And again, that was so kind of wonderful to be, celebrated for my contribution. And I think that says a lot about my director on that project and the ad agency. They gave me, it was wonderful to be celebrated in that kind of way. And it was Michael Gracie who was our director. And he's done huge films like Greatest Showman on Earth. Yeah, Greatest Showman in the World. Greatest Showman on Earth. Oh, anyway, the Hugh Jackman project. And Michael was just kind of wonderful, and he was very celebratory. So often what would happen is that you do a series of drawings that would be based on a list saying, well, we know that we want a queen. We know that we want to have maybe Holly and Ivy kind of costumes, or we want a kid as a pulling cracker, or we want a Christmas pudding costume. So you come up with ideas and do drawings. And Michael was so wonderful. He said, look, I'm meeting and doing a presentation to the agency. Why don't you come? Because it seems silly to do. And it was so refreshing to break that third wall, that fourth wall, if you like, where you're then meeting. Because often you're always kept at arm's length. And so it was lovely to then be collaborating directly with the writers who came up with the idea. We presented my drawings, and so it was then wonderful to be able to sell the idea, round of applauses, and then kind of move on from that. And we came up with loads of different ideas that didn't necessarily end up in the shoot, but it's more this idea that it had been considered and that it had been thought about. Like we had turkey drumming. So the idea was we do a turkey costume. And I said, well, wouldn't it be better if the turkey turns up before she starts drumming? covered in feathers. And then after she's done a drum fill and she's done like a whole big drum roll, that the feathers have come up and she looks like a plucked chicken or she looks like a plucked turkey. And they were like, oh yeah, we love all of that. So, there's elements of that then filter through into a shoot. But I think there are times when it's a short commercial, so not necessarily all of these ideas are going to get seen through. But if you have that duty of care where you really want that collaboration to kind of be seen.
I really like your point about, just the idea that you're being considered. So breaking that wall, that I don't know whether you'd call it a chain of command or what you would call it, where you could. And Tim, our good friend Tim Plester, he made a similar point when I interviewed him, which is he said the best directors often they'll ask you to do another take, but after that, and they've done it their way, they'll say, right, let's do another take, but let's just do it however you think it should be done.
Yeah, which is really lovely. I think
which is lovely, and like you said, it might not end up in the final shoot, but it's just that feeling of being considered leads to better.
Yeah, I think there's often a time when some successful directors are celebrated like they're auteurs, and they're not auteurs. They have a team of people behind them that are facilitating for them. And I sometimes think that it's about when there's a good relationship, then there isn't this kind of micromanaging. I think sometimes people need to feel like they're in control of what they're doing. And often when you do wardrobe fittings, I did a job recently and the culture already was, this is going to be a nightmare. It's always a nightmare when we do these things. And I said to them, I haven't messed up yet. Why don't you wait until I've massively messed up and then let's worry about it? But it was the culture of their job. It was like, the only thing we have control over at the last minute will be wardrobe. And we know that if you're doing a commercial, often casting will be a headache, and often things like choosing the music will be a headache. But on something like wardrobe, if you've not done a drawing and you've made your costume look exactly like your drawing, so for instance, if you're buying stuff off the high street or from designer places like Mr Porter, and you've got a menagerie of wardrobe and lots of choices and options to fit your characters, if you don't rein those shoots in, then you have to be careful that they don't spiral into a world of indecision. And I've often said, not to be disingenuous to agencies, but often it's because nobody wants to be responsible for making a shit commercial. So the way that they micromanage it is by saying, is it because of the dad's t-shirt makes him look really stupid? And it's got nothing to do with the wardrobe. If you're fully prepped, it's often that you're extending a courtesy to the agency and client. So let's change that, let's change this. But to be honest, it's not going to look a massive amount of difference. I remember years ago doing a job and we had to make a band to look like a boy band. And we put them in the first outfits. And I literally had the director's head in his hands going, okay, what else have you got? And we went through hundreds of options. And then right near the end of the fitting, I said, let's put them all back in the original look. And the director, I swear to God, said, you see, Gammon, what was so difficult about that? And he loved my first option. And it was very much how sometimes it's about the process. Like, we need to show other people how much we care about what we're doing. Let's have 1,000 ties on set. And I'd go, well, it won't really make any difference because it's not just that you're not really featuring the tie. Or we did a thing recently for Hilton and we had the agency obsessing about the shoes that male actors were going to wear who had to look like Paris Hilton. And I said, have you cast actors who can walk in heels? Then why are you worried about what the heels look like? I said, I'm working to a budget. I'm not going to spend $2,000 on Louis Vuitton heels that no one's going to see in camera. They're not storyboard. So you'd end up having these stupid conversations with people. And it's partly from their point of view, not to be disingenuous to them. It's like, we just need to make the best commercial we possibly can. I'm powerless because I can only give an opinion about wardrobe. And often I'll be in a fitting and I'll say, so what about lighting? Are you happy with the keynote flows that the DOP is using? What? What's that? Yeah, you don't know about lights, do you? Fuckwit. Yeah. No, that's okay. But we don't like the t-shirt because you think that makes him look like a murderer. Okay, fine. But again, sometimes it's not even about me. It's more about their concerns about something. They just need to be seen to be articulate about it. And I'm sure there'll be people listening to this going, no, that's not true, Gammon, because we actually are really worried about the wardrobe. And I get that because I think there are times when you want your audience to be reflected in the guy that's in the kitchen, that's with the detergent, who's talking to the wife, that needs to look like other members of the audience, that you want them to feel like, oh, this is a commercial talking to me. I totally get it. But sometimes it gets to a stage where I'm the junior of the assistant of the intern of the company. I need to show the boss that I'm a strong person, so I need to have an opinion about something. And there's been times in the past, Charles, where I've done fittings and I've been more like an auctioneer. And I'll say, look, we've got the celebrity, 80% of the room like what they're wearing. Change the hat. Give me the hat. Let's put the bucket hat on back on. No, the bucket hat's not working. Flag cap. The flag cap's really good. No, not the boater. Put the boater back down. Leave the boater alone. Flag cap, the 8-piece Peaky Blinders hat. Really like it. Change it to the tweed one. Tweed one matches the barber coat. 90% of the room like the thing. That's really great. Okay, we changed the shoes. Somebody didn't like the shoes earlier. They're not in shop. Maybe gives a shit. Okay, change the shoes. Caterpillars. No, the Chelsea boots, we can put the caterpillars on. Okay, 90% of the room. And then I go over to the one person who just wasn't liking stuff. I said, what would make this work? And they said, I don't really like the tie. Okay, let's change the tie. Okay, we've got 100% on the room. It's sold. It's sold in. Right, go to set. And sometimes you would use that. You gauge the room, but you would then, it's my theatre, if you like, Giles. And there'll be times when I will never be like that. I'll be submissive and quiet. And because sometimes that's not what's required. But there are other times when I remember doing a job and the agency, my director said, I'm spent. I'm absolutely burnt out by this agency and client. You're going to have to do the fitting on your own. I said, that's totally fine. I might break a couple of eggs, but you'll get an omelette. So it'll be wonderful. So I did the fitting and an email gets back to my producer. There's subject, Mr Gammon upper caps, ... And the producer's going, oh my gosh, what's happened? And of course, I opened it. Is an absolute joy. We love him. How marvelous. Yeah, he charmed the client. Yada, yada, yada. And sometimes, as I said, it's not necessarily about the wardrobe. And that's the side of the work that I find challenging. Sometimes that can be kind of wonderful. It's often before you're met that's when it's a headache. Then when they meet you, they love you, they trust you, and it's signed off and away you go.
Yeah. That quote I used in the introduction, which ends, the beauty of a great costume designer is to look like you were not there at all. So it sounds like in some instances you really have to actually be there behind the scenes.
Oh, yeah, no, totally. And I think especially in commercials. Like when I've done TV dramas and long form, you're often on set. In fact, you're not on set. The whole point is you might be there when they've established the first scene, but they might be filming a sequence where it's the story day and you're filming that for a week. So you don't have to be there every day doing that. You're either at unit base or you're on the truck if you've got a 40-foot trailer, depending on how big your shoot is. And I'm fitting other actors for the next day, or I'm prepping, or I'm going out, or I'm seeing the tailor, or we're getting stuff altered, or we're changing stuff that's going to be ready for the shoot days that are coming up sequentially in the sequence of events over the week. And so that's different. But when you're on a commercial, there's a lot of hand-holding. So that I think, again, I often feel like I'm an ambassador for my director and I'm an ambassador for the production. And yes, they could be a twitchy client, or they could be a really twitchy agency. Maybe they're about to lose the account. Maybe they've spent years trying to develop this commercial and they're super worried about it. So there'll be times when I'll go in and be, no problem. It looks good. I love it. And then you become a cheerleader. Oh, how much did you see that perform? Oh, isn't that great? They should turn this into a sitcom. I do that a lot. Even if it's rubbish.
Is it tricky to manage that kind of chain of command, or at least different parties involved?
I think it depends. I think I've been on jobs where when people haven't been particularly nice to me, I've said, listen, there's a chain of command. Don't come and talk to me directly. You go talk to your line producer, who will talk to my line producer, talk to my producer, talk to the director, who will then talk to me. And that will often happen when people are being very knee-jerky, because otherwise it gets to say, well, you can't do your job. I effectively work for the production company. I don't work for the ad agency. The ad agency might be the client of the production company, but there are times when I can be quite fearless with them because I can use my humour and goodwill and listen to what is required, but I'm not at their beck and call because I'm an HOD, I'm head of department, and I'm working for the shoot. So there is that kind of distance. But there are times when it's just nice to kind of break the ice, or there'll be times when there's been a miscommunication and I'll just quietly say, hey guys, let me quickly show you the thing that you is fine. And often, not to talk out of sync with production and agency, but there are times when some of it's about control. They're managing people's expectations. They don't want to show stuff too early on to upset people if it's not right. They don't want people to change stuff if they're given an opportunity. There's also lots of different reasons why that may or may not happen. And, and I can imagine in lots of different shoots that are happening constantly, it's all about managing that kind of expectation and all that kind of thing, and the communication of what's required, who's happy, who's not happy. Is that the right way of doing something?
Time, weather,
We interrupt this podcast to announce that we will never interrupt this podcast with ads. Ads that awkwardly nudge you to contact the pod's host, Giles Edwards. Only last week, some pod listening companies did just that, calling for guidance on building a funnel. But we're not asking you to do that. Nope. Anyway, back to the show.
My first sort of proper paid weekly job was a holiday job as a student, which was driving a forklift truck at the Ribena factory.
Call to action, episode 11, with the one and only Rory Sutherland. Not what we were looking for, but hang on a minute.
Is it very obvious how much you enjoy the work that you do? I'm sure not in every instance, because that would be a bit too showy-offy, but given you've brought to life everything from, the moon landings, superheroes, Ed Sheeran's Sad Blue Monsters, and the elegant men of the Congo in that wonderful Guinness Sapeurs ad. Do you miss the characters you create when the job's done?
Well, darling, they live on camera. Oh, they live on. The thing that I sometimes find heartbreaking, and it is the process, and and I'm there providing a service for people, is there'll be times when you'll be in the process and you'll spend weeks in back and forth on mood boards and referencing. We want the shopkeeper to look like this, but not too much like that. I think there are times when you work so hard on something and then you see the final job and you go, what was all that fuss about? That was literally a 30-second commercial that would give people enough time to switch channels. Yes, that's true. People still watch television, not as much as they used to, but yeah, it's a funny game. There is an element where we've put so much into something and blinking you miss it. You miss a lot of that kind of detail, and that is kind of part of the process. But I think that's the difference between a lot of the beautiful crafted stuff that I do and the DFS commercial. Not that there's anything wrong with those, but that's a message which is $9.99 for $9.99. That's $9.99. There's a different type of language that they're trying to ship units. Much as we are as well, but it's done in a way that hopefully, I'll often say you're watching. This isn't a commercial. This is a scene of a movie that wants to look like a commercial, or vice versa. No, that's wrong. Scrap that. You want this to look like it's a scene from a movie. So it's got the traits, but it happens to be a commercial. So, and hopefully in the work that I do, that is then reflected in.
And how do you know when you've nailed the job then?
Just when people leave you alone. I think when people leave you alone, and if I'm then on a 5-day job, I'm still getting up to people going, looks great, isn't it? Yeah, okay. But I think it gets to a stage when people then move on to another problem. I'll often say there's a 4-day wobble or a 3-day wobble where all of a sudden somebody's looking at something they've never seen before and they fixate about something. So that often happens. But, I think generally it's, you are still providing a service for people. Now, the one thing that I do that a lot of my contemporaries don't do is that when I do fittings, I get a Colorama. I've got an SLR high-res, what's it called? It's called a camera. That's it. And I have a soft light and I do photo shoots. So when I'm on set, I take photographs of everybody, whether it's an extra or it's the main cast, hair and makeup, the whole lot. And it's partly that I always advise my assistants on their own jobs, archive everything, just keep a record of everything you've done. So if someone says to you, have you ever done miners? Have you ever done a Cornish miner? And you go, yep, I have. Here's the pleader shoot from Alt J, and here are my Victorian Cornish miners. It's there. You've done it. You've photographed it. And you've got a record of it. There's a job that came out yesterday, which is the new Carlsberg job, which is it's only 40 seconds or 30 seconds. It's a really short commercial cast of hundreds of people. Every different scene we shot a day on it, but all the prep, the fittings, from shoes and buckles and everything. We do an 18th century scene, so it looks like it's a conductor who's conducting in this Regency style. So it's 1800s, So was it 1800s? 1700s, 18th century. That's it. And it was beautiful brocade fabrics and high wigs. And, we dressed everybody. The wardrobe team was 6 people in my team. They came in at 3 a.m. and by 7 a.m. I waltz in and we make little changes and tweaks and stuff. And then they're all ready to be blocked out on set for 8:30. That's on camera for less than 5 seconds, 7 seconds. And we spent an entire day shooting it. Shot that in Bulgaria back in November, December. Just an absolute gift. But the level of work on that, Giles, was like doing a movie. But it was different time periods throughout the commercial. And we've done kind of Neanderthal people. We did 1920s jazz. We did a rave concert. And they just looked like just a regular crowd. But some of the extras that were brought in were like my dad's age. And I said, oh, my God, we've got to make them look like they're just kind of cool Western hipsters or people at a gig. So we had to wardrobe everybody. So, but, that's a gift. And I think there are times when you've got the support of production and the support of a good team, then you can turn things around and you can get stuff done. Job's a gift.
Amazing. Slightly mindful of time, and there was something I wanted to ask you earlier, but I've just noticed it is in one of our listener questions, so I might head there now.
Okay. Asking
the general public for their opinion, be it on Brexit or boat names, is notoriously fraught with danger, but that's not stopped us asking. I'm going to go straight to Lisa. Lisa asks, where did the persona Mr Gammon come from?
Well, that was a joke at school. So just as much as me wanting to say, I'm going to do needlework as a GCSE and kind of having everyone laugh their heads off, this Mr Gammon thing came out when I was on Art Foundation course, where I was adopted by 3 wonderful mature, well, they weren't mature students, but they were in their 3rd year and I was still a teenager. So there was like a 5-year gap between us. And they went off to do a Jane Austen project. They came back and said, you're going to be our Mr. Darcy, but your name is Gammon, so we're going to call you Mr. Gammon. And I stuck to it. And that was that's one of the hardest things, because people don't like the idea of having something that they don't know about you. But from a marketing point of view, there was something kind of interesting about it. But yeah, it's kind of weird over the past couple of years. It's become a name for fat, middle-aged Tories. But I just think, hopefully I disassociate from all of that kind of stuff.
I am, just so Lisa knows, the rules I understand are, unless you're booking a flight for Mr Gammon, you need not know his real name.
Yes, that is true. And I'll often say to people, don't piss on my fire, because obviously I'm going to tell you my first name, but, and people have been really sweet about it. People, it's not such a big deal. I mean, it's lovely that people have said, oh no, it'll be totally secret. People don't add it to call sheets, and it's lovely.
Yeah, no, that is a good thing. I understand. Also, I wonder if, from a marketing perspective, I 100% understand the opportunity and like the value of having a different kind of alter ego brand, if you like, name. Does it give you any more? Like, are there any other positives when it comes to actually styling yourself? Like, do you see it as another character, or are they very much the same people?
Yeah, I think. Well, I think my analogy is to when I was at college and I insisted on being called Mr. Gammon, and nobody spoke to me for the first 3 weeks of my degree because they all thought I was a conceited, pretentious idiot. But the parallel to it was a lot of my friends who found their sexuality when they were at college or they came out. That's what you do. If you're fortunate enough to do a degree or to kind of find strength in reinventing yourself. So you might not have, but you may be trans or LGBTQ+, and you just don't know how to articulate that. The best way of reinventing yourself is when you then start a new college or a new job, or if you're quite young and you get into a new kind of scene. And, my coming out was just, I'm now called Mr. Gammon, and I'm going to stick to it. And, even I'd have girlfriends going, do I have to call you Mr. Gammon? And I'd be like, man, you can call me Gammon or Mr. G or G. And people kind of stuck to it. And so it became a mantra for a long time. And I remember having an agent very early on who said, you don't deserve the right to be called Mr. Gammon. You have to pay your dues before. And I said, yeah, but I'd never be able to change. Once I'm established, I'd never be able to change it. So in the early days, being called Mr. Gammon was more to my detriment. I think people thought they were booking their school teacher. But when I was styling cheesy 2000 pop sensation Hearsay, They loved the fact I was called Mr Gammon. I get credit on their album. In fact, there's a band that I styled called My Life Story, and the lead singer wrote a song called The Eloquence and Influence of Mr Gammon, with lyrics, quote, "You've got to be obscene to be heard. Bless you, Jake."
That's a beautiful line. I bet you've also described it as pretentiously endearing, which I think is bang on.
Yeah. I think I take my work very seriously. I don't necessarily take myself seriously.
Yeah. If Mr Gammon didn't exist as an alter ego, would anything change about you, about how you present yourself, how you dress yourself?
No, I think I'm really enjoying. I think we're very fortunate in the UK. I think we're very fortunate at the time we're living right now. I think it's not like when you kind of talk to the oldies and grandparents and stuff, and you realise that there are no-go areas in Soho where you get beaten up. There was a whole element of life that was not tolerant, and I'm very lucky. And I also think the older I become, the more I become more palatable. I don't know what it is, but people stop me in the street and say, "Oh, I love your look," or "I love your hat," or all that kind of stuff. And I think that has become very much part of my brand. People, when the Guinness Sapeurs job came up, the producer said, "There's this job that may come our way, and you'd be perfect for it." And very rarely do I do a job where I'm then an extension of that job. But that was very serendipitous to have a job that worked in that kind of way. Jobs again.
Well, that job in particular, there's a love. To me, if I was you, I would take this as one of the biggest compliments. But the wonderfully talented director Tom Kuntz describes you as someone from the 1800s has travelled to the future but arrived in colour, and it's just beautiful. That kind of.
No, that's so funny. And there were times he'd tease me. Yeah, he'd tease me and he'd say, "Oh, like Valenquez has turned up to our shoot, everybody." Or I'd burst into a bar and say, "What year is this? What year is this?" But I still would hope that. I think there's a lot of eccentrically dressed people. Like, my pet hate are people with curly moustaches, and by meaning that, I can't bear people who put loads of wax in their moustaches and make them really twirly, because they're no better than your suburban weekend punk. So you go to Barclays, there'd be a guy with a Mohican who's combed his hair back, and at the weekends he gets his hairspray out and he spikes it up and he's down Camden High Street. Suburban punk, I hate you. Whereas I think I have a look that's more palatable. So I'm not so gregarious, I'm not so outrageous, but I will have the everyday person in the street go, "Oh, people are very sweet and complimentary about my kind of look." And I think also it's come with age. Now that my beard has gone white, my daughter says I look like Santa on holiday. She's coming up to 9, so yeah, she's like, "Yeah, you look like Santa on holiday." I'm like, "Am I being roasted by my daughter?"
No. That's good. I'd take that. George V, Edward VII, Santa on a holiday, whatever it is, it's a good look.
Yeah,
I'm envious. The other question we had was from James, and it's about your drawing. He says you post wonderful drawings you've done of people out and about, often on the Piccadilly line.
Yes.
Do you always carry your sketchbooks with you, and what does drawing bring to your work?
I've got my sketchbook in front of me, Giles, and it's weird. I need to do something with them. I've been doing it for a long time. What it brings to me is it validates who I am. There's partly I said this to I was talking to someone recently going, "Oh, I wish I could draw. I'm terrible at drawing." I said, it's not about the end thing. It's the process. It's my Sudoku. It doesn't matter if it's a bad drawing. It's about making a mark. There's a fantastic quote from a Wim Wenders film, and Peter Falk is playing an actor, and he's in Berlin, and he's constantly drawing, which Peter Falk did. And there's a scene where he's talking to an imaginary angel, and he said, "You don't know what it's like to be human." The idea of having a cigarette, bashing your hands together and rubbing your hands to make them warm, to get a pencil and to make a line, and you make another line, it's a good line. To do a drawing, there's something very human about that process. And the wonderful thing for me is that in our work that we've been discussing, you're constantly looking for people's approval. It's all for the sake of the want of the client. And the one thing about my drawings is I'm not doing it for anybody. I'm not trying to sell them. There's something that is mine. And it's like, I call it creative offsetting. You'll like this, Giles. So the idea is we do a commercial. We're there to encourage people to buy shit they don't need. And I burn my soul to do something that you ended up seeing the final product when it arrives on YouTube and you die inside by going, oh God, what a load of old rubbish. And then I do a drawing and go, so that was for me. That's kind of wonderful.
Creative offsetting.
It doesn't matter if nobody sees it. That's just my thing. So it's my creative offsetting. I'm not saying that all commercials are encouraging people to buy shit they don't need. It's just a silly catchphrase. But you get my point.
Nice. That's wonderful. It's like Ed Sheeran planting his wildflowers.
Yeah, totally.
Carbon
but, oh my
footprint.
God, I bet, yeah, he wouldn't be able to draw his wildflowers as well as I can draw
No, I don't know.
a drunken man on the Metropolitan line.
No, you're right though, and actually, I wonder if, like, I suppose with the increase in tablets and all sorts of different tech and devices, that the distance between people and like mark making of any kind is just getting further and further.
Yeah, and I do think again, there was this whole thing where you and I know that we could go online, get a AI software, maybe get it to scan 5 of my drawings, and then put in this style, draw number 10 Downing Street, and they'll do a Mr Gammon drawing. But that's kind of not the point. And I think, there's this huge debate about AI that, will continue with other people that you have contributing to your podcasts and stuff. And it's something that we all feel quite threatened by. Everyone talks about Terminator 2 and, you take the decisions away from humanity, then the robots will make the decisions for us and all that kind of stuff. But there was I forgot the name of the, who was the TV chef? She was on Question Time, and I can't remember her name, but she made a really good point. She said when she was a kid and you watched science fiction film, you constantly thought that humanity was working towards AI or kind of sentient beings that were robots, so that you'd stop humanity having to do labor, packing shelves, moving brickwork, menial kind of work, and that humanity could then celebrate itself by being artisans and drawing and doing whatever, creative poetry. That's the cream of what epitomizes the human condition. Surely, to have a robot, to have Google say, "Hey, guess what, Giles? So we listened to like 20 of your podcasts, and all the ones in future are going to be done by AI. We know the questions you're going to ask. We don't need. You don't need." So all of a sudden, the thing that you enjoy doing, your creative offsetting, is call to arms, call to action. I don't even know the name. Do you know what I mean? That is your way of to have the fun thing taken away from you, the creative thing taken away from you. It's like, well, what's the point of that? Having Google obsessed with cracking the code so it can tell a good joke kind of defeats the object of being human. So does that mean that we're all going to be just stacking shelves and doing menial work because they can't get robots cheap enough to do that? That's how it seems to be. And all of that came from my drawings.
Yeah. Well, I think you've really landed on a great point, because I think most people inherently understand the point you're making but struggle to articulate it so well.
Yeah.
I once saw, on the topic of AI writers, AI copywriters, but it's just as applicable to AI doing one of your drawings, and the line goes, "Why would I bother to buy something that nobody was bothered to draw?"
Exactly.
It's
such a good point. And I think, so I was taking this up for tea. I think that's a really succinct way of putting it. And I think there's always going to be that kind of kickback. And I think that will come to a stage, and it will be pushed by advertisers and clients who will say, look, we need to do a lot more content than what we're doing. It's going to be cheaper for us to animate stuff, and it can look as good as EastEnders. Well, then we don't need to have a film crew and a crew of 40. We don't need a wardrobe person. We don't need production design. We can build it and it won't look, you and I know that there's been loads of car commercials where they'll shoot the location, but there's no car. That's animated later because they haven't finished designing the car.
Yeah.
And so that is a form of AI. And production designers I know will say, why is everyone beating up AI so much? It's just another tool. Like, you could still say that a photocopier was a very early form of AI where it was copying sheets of paper for you so you didn't have to. There are different forms of that. And I like to do sewing videos. And there are times when I'm editing my sewing videos because nobody needs to see me in real time stitching a repair. I like to repair clothes. If I'm repairing something, that could take 10 minutes to, you don't need to see that in real time. But you need an AI to then take out every alternate space when there isn't a needle on camera. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
That would work. But let's not encourage that.
The final part of the interview then, Mr Gammon, is our 4 pertinent posers, starting with what advice would you give to your younger self?
My advice, well, there's a couple for me as my younger self. If I was going to go down the path of being a fashion designer, when I said earlier I did another collection, kind of wasted a year doing it. I saw a friend of mine who kind of shrugged and said, why don't you just do 3 shirts and 3 colours and 3 designs? Boom. So much easier than doing, 30, thinking, the process. 3 designs, 3 colours, 3 sizes. Boom. That's one piece of advice. The second bit of advice would be, I've always been a sole trader, if you like. I've always been head of department. I've never assisted anybody. And I think if I was to take things further, I should have started assisting in film and kind of getting a head start in long form much earlier by assisting and being on kind of big movies. And I think that opportunity is still there for me, but as a head of department, it's a harder sell going from commercials into long form. It doesn't mean it's not possible, but it's just a different path. And, a lot of producers and, they can be a bit set in their ways. So that's the second piece of advice I'd give my younger Gammon.
Nice. If you could banish one thing from your industry, what would it be and why?
There's a thing where I would try and banish rudeness. I think, P's and Q's. I don't mind if you don't like something, but be nice about it. It's kind of like we're making a commercial. I didn't kill anybody. You don't like the jacket? We've got 1,000 jackets, but ask me in a nice way. Please and thank yous would be one of them. But the other one is, I think working in costume, and you see the hair and makeup departments, and you see in certain departments in production where we have really embraced inclusivity, not diversity, but LGBTQ+, people of all shades of colour, the spectrum of people. And I still am concerned that you'll walk onto a film set and we are still not embracing inclusivity. It's not inclusive enough. You're not seeing people. We're in London and my assistant will say, I'm the only person of colour on this entire shoot. And we're shooting, yes, there'll be black cast members, but she'll be the only person of colour behind the camera. And there's still a lot that needs to be done with that. So if that answers that other question, it's to encourage more inclusivity in other departments, like the sound department, playback, get the gaffers and grips and lighting department, runners and catering, all of that.
Yeah, well said. Number 3, are there any books that you can recommend to our listeners?
Oh, I've got a pile here. I was waiting for this one.
Hey.
This is our how-long podcast about to start. No, I'll be very kind of quick. So, and I'll send you either photos of the thing. So, these aren't necessarily just purely books. I'm going to start off with a book though, and it's Tete Michael Komasi. So Tete Michael Komasi, he wrote Michael the Giant. And it's about his tales from when he was a teenager and he left Africa and commuted and lived in Greenland. And it's a remarkable book about being out of sorts, being the only person, being driven to do something that no one thought you'd be able to do. He's like, it's just a remarkable tale of humanity and him being the only person in that kind of world. I love travel books. So my other book on my list is by Paul Theroux, who's Louis Theroux's dad. He did a book called The Old Patagonian Express, and that was a book written in the 70s. So it's slightly of a bygone era, just because that's the period he wrote it in. And it's about him taking the local Boston subway and realizing that from there he could travel all the way down the Americas, the states of America, all the way down to the most southern tip of Patagonia by train. And it's a remarkable book that talks about the history of all the different countries that he goes through, the idyllic parts of those Southern American countries, Central America. It's just a remarkable story, and I just love it. It's better than fiction. So as Paul Theroux's The Old Patagonian Express, I'm now walking across to, I love this book, is during, you know, Miranda Julie, she's a director and actor. She did a podcast. Oh no, she did a website. It was one of the first websites to be, once it was taken off air, that it was then curated in the San Francisco Museum. They did a book based on it called Learning to Love You More. And it was with Harold Fletcher and Miranda Julie. And the book is just remarkable. On the website, they would set tasks for people. And it's this idea, it goes back to my sketches and my sketchbook. It's the idea of creating art and photographing and submitting it to the website, and they would post the challenges, if you like. So some of them would be photograph, make a poster based on a book that you read when you were 12. So it's inspirational art. And the book is just full of the people's stories and why that, you know, like bad photography. There's a lovely section where it's take photographs of your parents' house like it's a museum. So like their collection of knickknacks. And again, it's this human, you know, the human process. It's all about decision-making, of bad art. And it's just, you know, it's a really wonderful kind of pictorial book, but there's a story behind each person who submits work. You know, take a photograph of, you know, there's like a book of bad tattoos. You know, it's all kind of self-drawn stuff. Hold on, I'm just looking at it now. There's this wonderful thing. You take a photograph of strangers kissing. That's just remarkable. And it's just a really great kind of book that just shows you this commonality that we all kind of have. Like there's a sequence of photographs where people have taken photographs of under the bed. And it's just fluff. And sometimes there's a cat in there, or there's a discarded magazine, or there's a old suitcase. Moving on to my fourth book, there's a couple more. Irving Penn. So this is photographic. In the 1950s, Irving Penn, you know, the famous Vogue photographer, did a project where he took photographs of tradespeople. The book is a remarkable coffee table book, and it's of the 50s, and it's got photographs from London, Paris, and New York. And there's this wonderful explanation about why he was commissioned to do these beautiful portraits. And he put up adverts saying, I want people to turn up at this studio wearing the clothes that you wear for work. So it feels very much, Giles, of a bygone era. We don't see people like this anymore. But you look at these photographs and they're so kind of beautiful. And you've got photographs of people in London as a newspaper salesperson, or you've got a nurse, or you've got a sculptor, a prize fighter. And they're beautiful full-length photographs. And he says in the book that when he took photographs of Londoners, they were kind of pragmatic, and they'd have their photograph taken, they'd be a bit slouchy and a bit scruffy. You then took photographs in New York, and he was blown away by the pride. You'd see like a traffic cop, and there'd be a fastidious look, immaculate kind of cool tailoring, and everything in America was fresh and crisp, and the 50s and all this kind of stuff. And then when he went to Paris, the Parisians were like this. Why are you taking my picture? There's this suspicion. So again, it's about, you know, the human process. You just kind of look at the vocations of these jobs, you know, like from bakers and tailors and, you know, cleaners and soda clerk, hockey player. It's an amazing book of, it's kind of pleasing when you're looking at something, you're not looking online to look at it. You're looking in a book and just seeing these beautiful renderings of these photographs of people of a bygone era. I'm nearly finished. I love the illustrations of an Italian graphic illustrator called Sergio Toppi. And they've republished these books in English. And there's one called The Collector. And it's almost like a Western. But it's 1970s, 80s style illustrations. It's all black ink, scratchy illustrations, beautifully rendered. And they're all kind of fables, and they're all very kind of rural stories of a bygone era. They're all kind of based on a mythical stone or an eagle that's got its own sentient thoughts that are separate from humanity. It's just a wonderful book of illustrations that I really love. And finally, I'm going to end with this one. Controversially, it's not a book. it's the Financial Times at the weekend. And the writing is just wonderful. I keep, I now look like the kind of person who's just got stacks of newspapers in his house. It gives me a break from screens, Giles. So I'm not looking at a screen. I'm not downloading the downloadable version.
One of those hoarders.
Occasionally. I mean, the Weekend magazine is just fantastic. I was reading an article about beached whales that made me cry. Just beautifully written. Then I read another article about, gender politics with regards to science, with regards to medical health. Just remarkable. And I always find it really funny because I always say to Susan, my partner, there's sometimes there's a glossy magazine called How to Spend It, HTSI. And I always think it should be called HTSI. And she goes, well, what do you think it should be called? And I said it should be called INFY. She says, what does INFY stand for? And I say, it's not for you. When you were a kid, Giles, and you pick up, I don't know, The Traveller by Condé Nast, Vogue's. When you read a magazine and you go, this isn't for me. It's full of art worth £10,000 or watches that are worth a gazillion pounds. But there's just something about that supplement that is just really wonderful. So that's my other recommend. Financial Times Weekend, news articles are really good, non-biased, really great kind of story, really great news articles. And then the in-depth long pieces are just remarkable, just really good. Let's leave it at that. And I'll email you links to all of those shenanigans.
Yeah, please do. Yeah, that's amazing. Do you know what? It's all too rare as we clock up to close to 140 episodes to get one or two books that certainly haven't come up before, but you've given us 5 that I'm pretty confident saying haven't. So that's wonderful. I love it.
Oh, no, well, thank you.
Thank you.
No, thank you. I was spending ages going, oh, should it be this one or shouldn't it?
Yeah, it's surprisingly hard, right? It is surprisingly hard to choose. And then number 4 is we always dedicate every episode to someone, and we bestow or hospital pass that honour, depending on your view, to our guest, who has to give their reason why. So would you dedicate this episode?
I'm going to dedicate it to 2 people. I'm going to start off with Susan Alcindor, the love of my life. She's just remarkable. She is my partner, just wonderful. She's, when you realise the older you become, how much you learn from someone who's just terrific. In the area, doing the school run and stuff, Susan will take ages in getting home, and she's just loved by the community. She's a fashion stylist herself. She's just a wonderful person. And the amount of times when people will say, oh, Susan, she's lovely. And I'll go, yeah, Susan's a pillar of the community. I am a pillock. That kind of says it all. And my other one goes to Jake Shillingford of My Life Story, the lead singer of My Life Story. He is My Life Story. When I was a kid, they were the first band that I styled, and I designed clothes for Jake. And it was very glam rock. It was at the tail end of the 90s. They were like the better version of Divine Comedy, a band with kind of 12, 13 members to the band. The reason why I'm dedicating this to Jake is Jake has an album out. It came out like a month ago or so. Just remarkable. He has a loyal fan base. He has on his albums Dedicated to the Dedicated. He knows who his audience is. He did crowd sharing and crowdfunding when he was dropped by his record label in the 2000s. He was one of the first artists to try and say, how can I monetize my fan base so I can continue making music for my fans? Just a remarkable way of thinking before people were thinking of kind of funding in that kind of way. And he came back with an album called World Citizen in 2019 that was just remarkable. And then this new one is called Loving You Is Killing Me. It's just wonderful. All power to him.
Amazing. Well, this episode is very proudly dedicated to Susan and Jake. There's a final call to action for all of our listeners. If you head over to this listing, we have shared links to all of the books, including Michael the Giant, The Old Patagonian Express, Learning to Love You More, The Collector, The Urban Pen, I think you said?
Yeah, Urban Pen is Small Trades.
Perfect. We'll link to Jake's album as well. And there's a handful of ads. We'll include some choice cuts of some of your best work, including the new Carlsberg ad, if we're able to.
Yes,
Guinness Sapeurs, obviously, the DJ Shadow video.
Yeah, I haven't updated my website in ages. And it's a weird thing with social media. I sometimes feel that social media is a bit like me writing my name on a grain of rice and flicking it up a motorway. That's, when people are, I'll put the end on this. I did a job with Ed Sheeran, and he was kind to do it behind the scenes, and he name checks me. Here's Mr Gammon. He designed our wonderful blue monster for eyes closed. And then they film me talking through my designs, and he photobombs me, and he goes, it's all great. And I literally at the time thought, right, back down the hatches, a tsunami of followers are coming. I think I got like 10 followers off the back of being head checked and tagged in on Instagram and TikTok and all the rest of it. It's literally a grain of rice. I just don't know how to play the game properly. I think that's might as well write my name on a grain of rice and flick it up a motorway. Boom.
Amazing. How else can our listeners get more Mr Gammon? So you've got an out-of-date website. Where else can they find you?
Instagram is my go-to. I don't even use LinkedIn because I think it wants a scan of my passport and it kind of put me off. But yeah, Instagram and my main website, mrgammon.net.
Yeah, lovely. Well, I'll tell you what, we'll link to everything you've mentioned and anything else we can dig out that we think puts you in a good light.
Bless you.
Listen, I've enjoyed this so much. It's been a huge pleasure and a real privilege to chat. Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Giles. And thanks for your interest and enthusiasm. It means a lot.
And finally, thank you to everyone listening. If you've enjoyed the episode, please do share and review the podcast. Keep your questions and guest requests coming in. To get in touch, it's easy to find Gasp online or just email call-to-action@gasp.agency.
Can't get no call to action. I can't get no call to action, but I try and I try and I try and I try. I can't get no call to action. Oh, I can't get no call to action. Yeah.